Well, welcome everybody to Conscious Cafe Global. My name is Gina Lazenby and I'm welcoming you today to our morning session in the UK, but wherever you are in the world, greetings to you. We have a session with one of the world's most popular astrologers, Jessica Adams, and it's called 2022 and the Rare Astrology of the Pisces and Taurus Cycles. We are recording today. We've had two previous astrology sessions with Jessica, and I think there are about 12,000 views of the last one. We've had some great information from her. Jessica is joining us today from Tasmania, and I'll be introducing her in a moment. Just firstly, just want to tell you a little bit about Conscious Cafe. If you're new to Conscious Cafe, maybe put in the chat that you're here for the first time. I know a lot of the names and faces we've seen before. We are our community and conversation group. But for the last 18 months, 2 years, obviously we've been online. So we have a lot of online global events with eminent speakers looking at the future of the world and our skills that we can develop. And also quite a few of our local groups are having online and in-person meetings as appropriate. Our next big event is the 3rd of February, where we have another astrology event. This time it's Chinese astrology with Nick Haynes. We've had that event before. That's another exciting event to look forward to. And Judy can talk about that at the end. Judy Piatkas is the founder of Conscious Cafe, and we've been going now for almost 11 years, which is fantastic. Now, today's event, astrology, Jessica's going to talk about the unusual nature of it, what she says, cycles in Pisces, Aries, and Taurus. Some of you may be very familiar with her work and astrology, and some not. You may wish to ask questions or make comments along the way, and that's fine to do so, because we'll do as many questions in the sessions that we can. And Jessica's focus today is what she says, 3 departments of your life will shift dramatically in this coming year, with 2 of these revealing wonderful opportunities and solutions not possible for you in the last 12 years. So there's a newness here. The 3rd life department, which shifts, will bring a revolution that will set you free, and you have not experienced this radical new independence in your adult lifetime. That's an interesting promise there. Jessica Adams, BA, is the go-to astrologer for everyone who values big picture thinking and predictions about global events. And she's one of the very few astrologers who really like to specialize in prediction and dates. And her forecasts and horoscopes have been called breathtakingly accurate. And she's appeared in many glossy magazines like Elle and Vogue, and also in the Washington Post and the Guardian newspaper. She's the author of several books, including the #1 Amazon astrology bestseller, 2020 Astrology, Your 5-Year Horoscope Guide. Previous books include Essential Astrology for Women, Handbag Horoscopes, and 2020 Vision. She was born in London, but she now lives in Tasmania. In fact, she went to Tasmania on probably the last flight that arrived there, 15th of March, 2020. She spent really a professional lifetime, 30 years in astrology. And if you want to know more about her work, visit her website, where her focus is on teaching people how to do astrology themselves. And we're going to give Jessica a beautiful global warm welcome. We won't be applauding, we'll be waving our hands. Jessica, I'm going to hand over to you, and welcome to our Conscious Cafe session this morning.
Thank you, Gina. Thank you, Judy. It's lovely to see everybody here on all time zones. It's 10:10 at night, Wednesday night in Tasmania, and I'm going to start you off with the Taurus weather. Now, if you've got your birth chart handy, that's great. If you don't have it or you don't know it, that's fine too. We'll cover all bases in this, but I'm going to give you some practical advice on what is one of the most radical financial and economic cycles that you'll ever experience in your adult life. So no prizes for guessing that COVID is behind it. But what we're going to see very quickly from the 19th of January, when the lunar node changes into Taurus, okay, the north node is going into Taurus, the south node is going into Scorpio, the opposite sign, is an instant karma moment, okay? And it's taking us back, and you back, about 18 or 19 years into your past. And it's going to raise all sorts of questions about the karmic and cosmic balance sheet. Who owes what to whom? Who earns what and how? And your own life budget, the value or the price tag that you hang on the things that money cannot buy, and the compromises and deals that you're prepared to make. We have seen an entree into this since May 2018, when Uranus, the planet of revolution, independence, freedom, and shock, first went into Taurus, the sign of the bull. So if we look at the imagery of Taurus the bull, which is probably 2,000 years old and counting as an archetype in astrology, we have a picture of something very fixed, very earthed, very stubborn, very stable, very grounded. If you look at any illustration of Taurus the bull, you're going to see that sense of we shall not be moved. And if you have Taurus in your chart, or you know Taurus people, there's a kind of a fixed nature to them. They are in fact a very fixed sign. If you've ever seen a bull in a field, he's hard to move. But this idea of being hard to move and being fixed and stable and earthed and grounded is completely incompatible with Uranus now in Taurus in your chart and the charts of everybody around you. So there's resistance because Taurus is stubborn. You have to put a ring through a bull's nose to make it move. And a lot of what you're seeing and a lot of the difficulties that we're all having at the moment come from businessmen and politicians who are still tied to the past. They don't do astrology. Not for a single moment. They think it's hocus pocus, but all around them, the astrology is proving itself. And this current difficulty that we're having is really the resistance is futile movement, because you can't build back better with Uranus in Taurus, and you can't put band-aid solutions on things which are this big. And what we're going to see 2022 and 2023 is the most radical stage of the economic revolution yet. We will be taken back to the war years. So if you go back to September 1939, when we last saw the lunar node cycles in Scorpio and Taurus and Uranus in Taurus too, same, different, what we immediately had on the menu was rationing and supply shortage. I said this is going to be a practical talk, and it is. If you haven't already got yourself a well-stocked pantry and a sensibly stocked container of absolute essentials, then just pick it up. It's no big deal. You don't have to panic buy, but astrology is about using what we know about the past to help the future. It's no longer a joke. You know, it was a joke at the beginning when we were all running out of blue paper in early 2020. But now, of course, there's lots of you here from Sydney and Brisbane and Melbourne. Australia is running out of tests. There are no tests on the shelves to be had. We'll get more into that, the reality of all of that COVID stuff a bit later with your questions as well. But the first thing that you need to know about the next 2 years is history does repeat itself in astrology, and we are going to see sudden absence of what we're used to on our shelves. If you pull up that picture of Taurus the bull, Gina, I think that's the first image that you've got to share. We can have a look at this archetype. Okay. There he is, I can see him in the corner. So this is a very beautiful illustration. These cards used to have pinpricks where the constellations are, where the stars are, so you could hold them up to the light and actually see Taurus the bull. Now, obviously I work as a medium and as a tarot reader, and lots of you here are psychic as well. And one look at that card and it looks like a tarot card. This is a bull in shock. Okay, this is a creature, let's say he's an archetype of the stable, wealthy, traditional, conservative businessman or businesswoman. Her Majesty the Queen is the Sun Taurus. That gives you an indication. All four hooves on the floor, but this bull is in shock. This bull looks like it's hit an electric fence. And in fact, Taurus, Uranus in Taurus, is about electric Uranus Taurus currency. So we're talking, of course, about Bitcoin, and we're talking about cryptocurrency and the shock that that's going to continue to have on the world share markets. Most of all, I think Taurus the bull, whether it's in your chart or the charts of the people that you know, about to receive what they call a conjunction from the North Node and an opposition from the South Node. That is an image of changing values. Your life budget, your shopping list, what you used to put a high price on, you no longer put a high price on. So in America, they're calling it the Great Resignation. They're going through an interesting phase in history that's not unlike 1351, and I'll get onto 1351 in a moment, when people decide that they want to recalibrate their personal life budget. Recreational shopping is over. Nobody wants to go into a shopping centre to spend 2 hours there with Rona. The old days when we used to place a higher value perhaps on particular properties or particular status symbols, all that diminishes in the face of the new value of being healthy. Your health is now more than ever priceless. And for those of you who have Uranus or Pluto in Virgo, you're born in the 1960s, sooner or later, this Taurus Scorpio weather is going to trigger you, okay? And if you were born in the 60s with Uranus and Pluto in the sign of health and the body, then your time has come, your moment has come. And what you're going to do as a generation is strike a deal with employers, strike a deal with politicians, the banks, the money men, in the name of your own health, because your price tag over your body has suddenly gone way up in value. So let's have a look at something that's happening on the side at the moment. I was talking about cryptocurrency, but we also need to look at transport, travel, and globalization behind the economic changes. So I think we've got a shot somewhere, Gina, of a Rolls-Royce aircraft. They're developing, as they would, a world sort of groundbreaking version of the old airplane. And these aircraft, these electronic aircraft, these Rolls-Royce claims to develop the world's fastest all-electric aircraft, are a really good indicator of the other cycle that's running alongside this amazing Taurus weather, and that is the Gemini cycle. So something really big happens on January 19th. I have no idea what it is. You might if you're psychic, but we're going to see the nodes move out of Gemini and Sagittarius, which rule electric aircraft, local journeys, international journeys. And from that point forward, what we see is the beginning of the rolling Gemini weather, which becomes its own revolution from 2026. What it means is that if you have anything in Sagittarius in your horoscope, you may have one of the outer planets because entire generations were born with them. Your buttons are pushed with international travel and foreign travel in a new way, because you're going to find a tremendous resistance and opposition to the old way of doing it, because Gemini is opposite Sagittarius in the heavens. And what we see from January 19 is the sudden end of any kind of Sagittarius weather at all for a very long time, and the rise and rise of Gemini. So in plain English, we're going to see the local rise up against the foreign. We're going to see the neighbourhood, your village, your town, your region become far more central to your existence than anything coming from abroad or overseas. And this is a sort of perfect storm that we haven't seen since 1351. So when I'm talking about 1351, in a weird kind of way, I'm talking about cryptocurrency and even things like the Brixton pound, you know, the Lewis pound, local currency that's been springing up. And the idea that your local Brixton currency, and I think we've got an image there, can show you how locals define their own budget and local economy. So this is a headline. The UK's local currencies are going crypto. Local currencies like the Brixton pound and the Bristol pound failed to save the British high street, but can they succeed as stable coins? This is what you call a perfect storm. And again, those of you who are psychic can read that like a tarot card. It's really interesting. What we're seeing is the rise and rise of life as it is within 10 or 15 miles of your front door. Okay, and it's not just the neighbourhood and the fact that there are all these changes in transportation coming and travel and the pushback against globalisation and international travel. It's also the fact that values locally are completely different to the values in, say, a skyscraper in Manhattan. So here in Tasmania, we know what, you know, a dozen eggs are worth to us. We know what we value more locally, and nobody else really does, because they don't have our climate, they don't have our geographical location, they don't have our population, and on it goes. This is going to be global. It's that unique mixture of the Gemini weather building and building until we get to Uranus in Gemini in 2026. Just before it, this Taurus weather this year, 2022 and 2023, when an awful lot of people are going to be triggered, not just about the old globalized economy, but in the need to stake their claim to their local turf and territory. I'm always asked about how to make money from astrology, which isn't a joke. In fact, if you follow the generations and the signs that are in their charts with Uranus and Pluto in particular, you find all the clues that you need. If you were around in the 1980s looking for an investment, and you were looking at the generation who were born in the 1960s, and they all had Uranus, the revolution, and Pluto, the need for total control, in Virgo, the sign of health and fitness, you would have invested in mineral water. You would have invested in gymnasiums, which at one point were only for professional athletes. You would have invested in health food shops, which at one point were only for freaks. Okay, so if you want to make money, you look at the generations as they roll towards you and their Uranus or Pluto sign. And what we're seeing right now with this sort of mesh of local currencies going crypto are entire generations born with the outer planets in Scorpio, which is the sign that rules banks and also currency, along with Taurus. And there are generations out there who have outer planets in Sagittarius, which is the sign of globalization and the international scene, who are going to find a lot of resistance and a lot of pushback. So what do you do when that happens? You do this. Even local food markets are going to be influenced by what we're going to see in 22 and 23. So if your local food market is anything like mine, then it's always been a kind of middle class indulgence. Okay, so it's where you go to get your terribly expensive sort of hand-picked, knew the chicken's mother's name, free range, organic, whatever, you know the story. But the new food markets that are coming, and I think we've got a picture of the way that they're going to be divided up, is very much about architects coming onto what used to be the old peasant exchange. And here we have a redesigned local food market with social distancing in mind, which is really interesting. It looks a bit grim from that illustration there on the right-hand side, but you get the drift. It is actually a different carve up of local territory and local turf. So coming back to that question of how do you thrive and survive in these two really, really extreme years, you need to start thinking locally. And you also need to start thinking about different ways to carve up the space. And one of the reasons for that is electric bike sharing, which is also going to be huge. If you haven't yet started saving up for your own, I know there's a few people here who trade. If you haven't yet looked at startups for electric bike sharing, that's an absolute winner. This is, of course, it's in Paris. Now, Paris is really interesting because as a city, it is home to a long astrological and psychic tradition. And a lot of Parisians in powerful positions use astrology, or they use the tarot or the Lenormand oracle. Chanel used the Lenormand deck. Monsieur Dior used the Lenormand deck. So there's a kind of cultural embeddedment in Paris of intuition, sixth sense, call it what you like. And they're already ahead of the game. They're thinking differently about their local area. You can look at Paris today and see what they're doing as a city and begin to understand the pushback against the international, the globalized, and the beginning of really owning your own home and the few miles outside your front door. And it's the same with electric car share. Exactly the same with electric car sharing, which of course the places like Belgium have been experimenting with for a long time. But it is a solution. Laura's saying electric bikes she highly recommends. Gina, I think we've got a picture of an electric car share scheme in Belgium that they've been setting off with. Yeah, it's called Green Mobility. What this does, it's really interesting. It actually physically changes the local space. So all the towns and the cities that we're used to have been designed around cars. They've been designed by men who are at the top 1%, who've got their own chauffeurs, who place a high priority on their own car, you know, one man, one car. It's sort of a little bit like, you know, Top Gun gone mad. It's got that kind of feeling about it where the people are second or the pedestrians are very slow third. But this new technology, which is coming in, which is more affordable than petrol, which is going to replace petrol, and which ultimately will be purchased with cryptocurrency, get your head around that, is going to reshape the actual design of your local town or village. The other thing that's going to be quite interesting for you as you go into this rolling Gemini weather, after the initial critical 22 and 23 for money and the old economy, is that you can choose where to live based on what they've got for you locally. But you can also play a bigger part in your own local town or city. One of the very good reasons for that is that you're spending more time there. It's sort of almost circular in nature, really. We've seen all the headlines, you know, all the flights in 2020, 2021 absolutely plunged. Anybody who had shares in British Airways or Qantas or Virgin really took a hiding. There's no sign in the astrology of that letting up. We are not going back, you know, we're only going on to a complete replacement. And the thing about electric cars and electric bikes, you can't go very far, okay? You can only go so far in them. But when there are less of them on the road, your local space becomes better. Your local space can be opened up. It can be opened up for the people on foot and not the old system. And of course, if you're working from home or you're part of the Great Resignation, if you're watching this from America, then you're not commuting anyway. Okay, that's another big trend that's coming through. So let's have a look at these peasants I keep talking about in 1351. Before we take a little break, I think there's a picture there of the Black Death. Okay, so here we are in exactly the same cycle. In 1351, Uranus was in Taurus, check. The North Node was in Taurus, check. The South Node was in Scorpio, check. The Black Death took so many lives across Europe that peasants and farm holders, agricultural labourers were in short supply. Their stock rose. They were able to demand and get 2 or 3 times their old remuneration. They were also in a position of power with the rich and powerful, where they could ask for money, okay, instead of a lot of potatoes or whatever they were giving them at the time. If you can imagine Baldric, you know, from Blackadder, demanding his rights as a peasant and getting them from Lord Blackadder, you're pretty close to what was actually going on. The other thing about this period in history, they had a climate emergency, exactly the same, but different. They had a little ice age. It was too cold. We, of course, have a climate emergency based on heating. But those two trends, a plague and a climate emergency, exactly the same now as they were then astrologically. And the ultimate result of that was massive social change, which saw an entire class of people rising up through the ranks and changing the balance of power with their lords and masters. And that's exactly what's happening to us in 2022 and 2023. So if you haven't already considered negotiating with your employer to exchange time off work in lieu of salary, or even if you're very lucky, being able to actually ask for more money because you're no longer costing them in office rental in some high-rise skyscraper in the middle of London, you're on the right track. What we're seeing in the stars is a perfect storm. Particular generations of people with particular priorities coming into conditions that we've not seen for hundreds of years, which are uncannily similar to what happened all those centuries before. Before we go to a little break, we'll have a look at the Great Resignation. I think Gina's got a headline there from a US newspaper. Yeah, there you go. Same, different. Great Resignation has left companies competing for talent. Isn't it nice to be wanted? So the other trend that's coming on the back of this or around it is the end of Pluto in Capricorn. So it's the end of the top 1% having power. Ultimate power, absolute power corrupts, absolutely. And that's what we've seen since 2008. Donald Trump, even though he's not a Capricorn, is the archetypal Pluto in Capricorn figure. That is going, gone. You are going to see these people at the top of politics and big business who have had it all their way for far too long go down by 2023. They're either going to resign, lose elections, withdraw because of illness, or they may leave the planet. But it's almost a rule with Pluto that whenever you get people who abuse power on a Pluto cycle, they never last. They never last. The last thing I'm going to show you is a book called Drawdown, which is brilliant, okay? Before we go for a little break for tea or whatever you fancy, trip to the loo, pat the dog, write this down because it's the most useful handbook, okay? Not just for people who care about the planet, but for an astrologer or somebody who's curious about astrology, because although Paul Hawken is not an astrologer at all, just about everything in this book tallies with the trends that we're seeing, the Taurus, Pisces and Aries weather. So we'll come back in about 5 minutes. I'm going to just chuff off and put some lipstick on, and we'll come back and talk about Aries the Ram. Thank you.
Okay, so welcome back from the break. We're going to do a few questions. Cheryl's Anne is asking about cryptocurrency and the euro, and she came up with specific dates of 4th to the 8th of April. Does that mean anything, or can you answer that one? She was speaking.
Sounds like, I'm not quite sure why you would single that out. We are heading for a Jupiter-Neptune conjunction in April, but it's in the sign of Pisces, which is not about money. Pisces is about religion or the tarot. It's about spirituality or meditation or Buddhism. It's about astral travel or hypnosis or therapy. It's not about making lots of moolah. Unless you've already invested in those things or you're going to bank on them, you're not really going to see anything particularly important take off. Unless you have, this is for those of you who are into astrology, a sextile, okay, from Jupiter and Neptune to anything that you have in Taurus, or a trine to anything that you have in Scorpio.
It's felt very wide across the southwest.
Okay, Jessica, I'm going to mute all, and then you unmute yourself because we've got people speaking. Mute all. Mute all. Right, now you unmute yourself. Jessica, you need to unmute.
Okay, so this is an interesting one. That is an important month, so do circle that in your diary. April is one of those interesting periods in history when we have Jupiter, the planet of opportunity and expansion and growth and solutions, and we have him moving exactly in tune with Neptune, who is a symbol of escapism, okay, and alternatives to the reality of the real world. I'm going to talk a little bit about Pisces in terms of, just get my notebook, not so much the material world, you know, but certainly the inner world. If you have anything in Pisces in your horoscope, or you are a Pisces, you know Piscean people, then this is quite an interesting period for you, because it hasn't happened in this particular way in your adult life. Although you may have been conscious of and around tarot cards, mediumship, therapy, self-help for a very long time, it's never really gone to another new level for you. It hasn't actually jumped, but it's going to jump this year. And in fact, it's already begun. So just in the last few hours, Jupiter entered Pisces, which is the traditional sign associated with the 12th house in astrology, the house of solitude, the house of going within. Pisces is the two fish which swim in opposite directions. And that is a fantastic way to think about 2022, because there's one side of you which swims in the real world, and there is another side of you which swims in a completely different space. And the technology is going to meet us halfway. So we are going to see things like sound walks, which I think Gina has an image of somewhere, whereby you put on your headphones and you trot off, once again, around your local village or your local town or city, never more than a few miles from your front door, and you are transported into another world. So a sound walk is an experience through the headphones. It's not just like listening to music or listening to BBC Six. It's actually something that's completely transporting on a mental and emotional and spiritual level. That's going to take off in 2022. The other thing about this cycle with Jupiter and Neptune, both in the sign of Pisces, the fishes, is that it is about problem solving. And that's terribly important. Jupiter has a reputation in all cultures across all time for being the biggest and the best. The Optimus Maximus label was attached to him by the Romans. Jupiter Optimus Maximus, the greatest and the best of the gods. And he is in fact a gas giant in astronomy. The Chinese used to think of Jupiter as the year star, and the Chinese signs of the zodiac, the 12 signs, are based on Jupiter cycles. And all of this was on the Silk Road, okay? Meanwhile, the Chinese astrologers were talking to the Roman astrologers, or their clients, and they were comparing notes with Indian astrologers who call, I have to get this right, Jupiter is Brihaspati, or guru. He's shown as a great big bearded Indian god, very, very similar to the Roman Jupiter. Now, the chance of one culture attaching all of this to a planet is interesting. The chance of two, fascinating. The chance of 3, you've got a story going on. So whatever Jupiter does, we pay attention to. And the interesting thing about 22, the good thing about 22 is that not only does he move in time with Neptune in Pisces, the sign of going within, he also moves in step with Chiron in Aries. We get 2 bites of the cherry in 2022. If you have anything in Pisces or Aries in your natal chart, then between 2022 and 2023, Jupiter will form a conjunction with them. So you're going to get plugged into massive expansion. And as I said, problem solving. Jupiter was always a problem solver in Roman mythology. He was the greatest and best of gods because he was the one that you called upon if you were completely stuck. Usually his family was at fault, but Jupiter always found a way through. We have all been living with Neptune in Pisces for a very long time. In fact, he's been in one area of your chart more or less since 2011. And Neptune is just what you'd expect on the packet or on the side of the can. There are no boundaries, just like the sea. Neptune was the god of the sea in Roman mythology. In your life, there's one area, one life department, which has been all over the place, all the time, everywhere. It's been extremely random with nothing to contain or control it, okay? It has transcended everything. And you eventually end up with confusion, confused people or confusing situations and circumstances. It's been a situation that's been crying out for boundaries, okay, for a really long time, and nothing's happened, and nothing's happened. But now here we have Jupiter right in Pisces right now. And according to all the laws of astrology, the repair work is going to begin. So take a peek at your chart, okay, and find where Pisces is in your chart, because that's the area or the house or life department where there's now going to be tremendous solution for you, but also expansion and growth as well. I'm just going to look at my little list of illustrations to see what I've got here. Have we found the sun walks illustration, Gina, at all? No, it doesn't matter.
So what did you want?
Sound walks.
I've got it. Yeah. Let me just quickly share the screen.
I don't think it's a particularly interesting picture. It's just a bloke with some headphones on, but
got it. And the bloke with the headphones is, where's the bloke with the headphones? There he is. Can you see that?
There he is, the first time sound walker. So if you see people sort of stumbling around the local park with their headphones on, that's what they're doing. But the thing about sound walks is you can be anywhere. You know, you can go for your daily constitutional 1 hour and you can be transported to 17th century Paris or outer space or anywhere you like, really. Sound walks are a really good example of 2 trends that are happening at once. So we've got this Neptune and Jupiter in Pisces trend going on, where everybody is going within, okay, in their own space, in their own little world. And we've also got this rolling Gemini weather, which is all about the local scene and the local community, that's going to build and build until 2026, when it absolutely becomes a hurricane. So put them together and you've got sound walking. So I don't know who John still is, but he's a good model of somebody who's in the zone. I thought I'd draw some tarot cards really just to look at Jupiter and Neptune in Pisces for the people who are here. It's important to have your target, really. One card can tell you so much, and in fact there's a bit of a story about this deck. The last time that we saw Jupiter and Neptune in Pisces, a very important book came out by an occultist in Paris called Eliphas Levi. Eliphas Levi was really the father of this tarot deck, which went on to sell 6 million copies. And another occultist called Arthur Waite, who created this deck with Pamela Coleman Smith, translated the book. So the last time that we saw this cycle in the 1800s, the tarot, or the modern tarot, was really born. So it's appropriate to use the tarot cards to see what we're in for and what we're up for. Okay, so this is the card, the Queen of Pentacles. For the lady who was asking me about April, and I was talking about your chart, or everybody's chart, if you do have anything in Taurus or Scorpio, and it works for you, Jupiter and Neptune together are going to form a sextile to anything in your horoscope that's in Taurus, the sign of currency, and also trine anything in Scorpio that works for you normally, which is in the sign of other people's money or joint finance. So there's a really nice, clear tarot image for you. I'm going to run a story on my website next week called ConsciousCafe 2022, and I'll post that card on so you can have a closer look. It's always good with Pamela's cards to go more deeply into them and see what clues you get. And I'm sure that you can see the rabbit in the corner. Okay, symbol of sex. Okay, always a symbol of sex in Pamela's tarot. At it like rabbits, breeding like rabbits. Scorpio is significant because Scorpio is about sex and money. So there's a bit of a hint here that for a lot of people whose charts are triggered by this transit, it's going to be about money and sex, sexual relationships and finance. What do I do with the money? All of those questions circulate. For those of you who do have Scorpio stuff in your charts, that works for you. Okay.
So Jessica, are you ready to go to like the second part? And I bring up the PowerPoint that refers to the Pisces cycle. Would you like me to do that?
Yes.
We do have a lot of questions, and the way I handle it was I literally downloaded it and I'll highlight it onto a piece of paper up to 11:37. I think we'll go on with the next section, and then if people hold back their questions, and when I say put your questions in, then I can download them, because it's quite impossible to go through hundreds of questions and pick things out, but I can manage it if I can do it on paper. So I'm saying that we'll do questions later. Okay, so I'm going to the screen share for you.
So that's just a little reminder of my website. If you don't already have the URL, it's jessicaadams.com. And if your questions aren't answered today, I will answer as many of them as I can in the feature on the website, just over the next week or so.
You didn't have any slides for Pisces other than the sound share, so I'll come back.
Okay, so just keep chatting about, some of these questions do relate to that cycle. Michelle H says, the Australian PM is a Taurus. Does this have an impact on Australia? Absolutely, yes. It's looking like, for those of you who are in Australia, very quickly, if the election takes place on Mercury retrograde in April or May, we will end up with a hung parliament with Labor, the Independents and the Greens holding the balance of power. Okay, if we vote on Mercury retrograde. It's happened before. And every time we get Mercury retrograde elections anywhere in the world, it's happened in the United Kingdom as well, we always get a hung parliament because nobody can make up their mind. And you always get quibbling over the results that goes on days afterwards. So watch the election date itself, but I'll post on my website as soon as we know it. Will house prices rise or fall? Well, it depends on your chart. If you have anything in Cancer, okay, which rules property, then you're in a very good position to make or save a lot of money on property in 2022 and 2023 as well, particularly. But once again, it depends on the local scene. You have to look at the local scene. You have to look at the reality of the new electric car and bike sharing, which is coming, the end of globalization, and the refit, okay, geographically of the local area, because that's going to matter in terms of what people are prepared to pay for. Switzerland, I need to get the Swiss chart out to do that. Cryptocurrency, will it grow or will it fall? It's going to follow an erratic zigzag, as you might expect, because crypto arrived with Uranus in Taurus in 2018, more particularly with blockchain, okay? And we're going to see shocks to the market throughout its career, throughout its history. It also uses an awful lot of electricity. And just a word on Uranus as a planet, it's always been associated with electricity, right since its discovery. Whatever sign Uranus is in rules new inventions, and they usually plug in. So as soon as Uranus arrived in Taurus, the sign of currency in 2018, everybody knew it was Bitcoin. But the rule with Uranus is it's like electricity, it can shock you. It can shock you, and you have to be prepared to take the shock. You need shock absorbers, basically, if you're going to work with anything that's an electric currency.
Jessica, about the cryptocurrencies, you talked about this zigzag. The idea of investing is that you take a long, if you take a long-term view, does it then become safer than if it's long term and it's going to be stable, if it's going to go up and down, it doesn't matter in the long term. What's your view on that?
Yeah, it's not a long-term thing at all. Uranus is about short-term shock, freedom, and independence that comes from nowhere. If we go back to its year of discovery, to give you an analogy, it was discovered in 1781, which is the year that everybody went into shock because a black slave woman won freedom from her white master. She took him to court and she won. Her name was Elizabeth Freeman. And it was the beginning of the end of slavery. Imagine what that did to the American economy and the British economy. That's the kind of thing that you get on this cycle. You get the one black swan event. And there's usually more than one. So the last thing that you expect to happen is always the first thing that happens with Uranus in Taurus. It's always a shock, even for astrologers and psychics whose business it is to look into the future. So when I predicted a virus twice in 2019, and I also predicted a huge change in the balance of power with China, I didn't realize I was looking at the same thing. So it's a shock even to people who do this for a living. Between now and 2026, particularly with cryptocurrency, we're going to see jaws on the floor. We are going to see the last thing that we expected happening. Okay, so if you think that you know that there's going to be a crash, you don't know yet. I think it's far more likely that what we're going to end up with by 2026 is thousands upon thousands of local digital currency. We're also going to see the end of the globalized internet. So American corporate social media will be replaced by genuinely local social media. One of the reasons for that is that you need your local social media in order to tell you what on earth is going on with that virus out there, which according to all the laws of astrology will be with us until at least 2026 and counting. That's not meant to depress you. It's just the reality of the cycles that we're in. And in fact, some people are going to make the new world work very well for them, not only because of this beneficial change going within, placing more value on what's inside you, being happier because you're doing the work on the inside. You no longer need the distractions of X, Y, and Z to make you happy. None of that is a new age cliche. It's all completely real and true. People are going to become happier on this cycle in 2022 because they're going to find the modality that suits them to go within and fix themselves, just be more comfortable about life. There's also, coming from the other direction, this intriguing rethink about work and why we do it, who gives us work and why do we do it, to quote The Clash, and the value that we place on work as opposed to being at home or having a life, you know, because something that's crept up, particularly on the Virgo generations born in the 60s, by anyone with Virgo in their chart, the creep up ever since we've been in the internet age is the work goes everywhere with you. You can never escape it. It's on your mobile phone, it's on your computer at home, it's there all the time. The people that you work with are part of your social life is part of your work. You used to knock off, you know, at 5 o'clock if you were lucky, and that was that. You know, you left your briefcase on the desk and you went home. Work didn't come with you. It has been coming with us for a very long time. It's a belief that I have that I can't possibly prove, that one of the reasons that we have dreamed up this pandemic is that the collective unconscious is sick of working, literally sick of working. There's one thing that the pandemic has done for almost everybody. It is absolutely changed the relationship between ourselves and work, whether we're now working from home or we've decided to resign in America, the Great Resignation, or whether we've just decided to start negotiating job share or less days a week. All the old rules are changing, and that's one of the good things about 2022. So we're coming up to the round hour. I've chatted a bit about Pisces. The other thing that's very, very Piscean is drugs. So Pisces rules anything that gets you out of it. Pisces and Neptune together in the 12th house are about mind-altering substances. And so 2022 is going to see a boom in new drugs, more available drugs, better drugs. I mean, I don't take drugs at all, but for those of you who do, the idea of transportative drugs is going to be huge next year. We're going to see much more legalization, much better control, more professional, you know, mature handling, really, of the drug market. And all of this association with drugs takes us back to 1846, when Neptune was discovered. It was the first time that anybody had experienced anesthetic publicly with surgery. And so Neptune has always been associated with anything that dulls the senses or gets you out of it. So morphine, heroin, marijuana, cannabis, all of that. I'd say it's fairly likely that we're going to see a great leap forward in those sorts of drugs. Jupiter is whatever fixes the problem, whatever that is. So that's just a kind of a footnote for astrologers out there. So it's now here in Tasmania, it's nearly 11 o'clock. So we'll take another little break. If you want to try the tarot for yourself in the break, okay, you can go to my website, which is jessicaadams.com, and just do a single card reading and draw a card for yourself and ask the question, what will Jupiter and Neptune in Pisces bring to me in 2022? I'm going to do it too, and I'll see you back here in about 5 minutes.
Welcome back, Jessica. Would you like to go on to the, are you talking about Pisces, or are you talking about Aries? And I'll pull up the slides for Aries.
Yeah, let's move on to Aries, the ram.
Okay, I'll pull up the slides and then we can come back to questions. I've collated a lot, got them here on paper, but let's do that PowerPoint while we've got it. Off we go, which is, where's it gone? It's gone here. Share. Aries cycle, play.
Aha, so here we go, another one of these fabulous illustrations. Again, they used to have pinpricks in the cards, so you could hold the card up to the light and see the constellation of Aries shining through. For those of you who are psychic, this is a fantastic illustration of what we're going to see in 2022. After May, things are going to happen very quickly in May and June 2022, okay, right up until October, and then again in the first quarter of 2023. Jupiter, biggest and best, the greatest and best, Jupiter, Optimus Maximus, moves into the sign of the Ram alongside Chiron, the Centaur. Now, it's been about 12 years since we've had that, and I find it so intriguing that this Ram appears to be leaping in the air or flying, because that's really what Jupiter does. And you have to wonder what that annoying blowfly is doing in the picture. It's almost as if Aries has had enough of the irritation, okay? Aries has had enough of being kept small, you might say, because Aries is a sign that really likes to go quite large. In your horoscope, if you have anything in Aries, in the natural chart system, it will be in your first house of image and self-promotion and self-projection. And so if you are lucky enough to have that in your natal chart, this is going to be a period of relaunch for you. You may get cosmetic surgery, you may lose weight, you may become famous, you may become more famous in an area where you were never famous before. You could get hair plugs, you could get a new wardrobe, whatever it takes, whatever you need to re-promote yourself and relaunch yourself. If you do have anything in Aries, you're going to experience a Jupiter conjunction to that. For all of us, no matter where our horoscopes are, this is going to be a period of the great leap forward, which is why this Ram appears to be leaping, in terms of how we operate online with avatars in a virtual space. So I think we have a picture here of telepresence, which is a term that may or may not last the distance. Telepresence is, I'm sure lots of you already know, the use of your image, okay, almost as if you were a creature online, but a very sophisticated version of yourself that you can send into a virtual space representing yourself. So Gina, you've got a shot somewhere here, I think, of a telepresence model or a telepresence proposal. This is from Cisco, and this is going to look very, very old, okay? By 2023, this is going to look like a sort of museum piece, because the new telepresence and the new Aries cycle, which is all about your image, your branding, your projection, your profile is going to insert a version of yourself that you choose. This is quite nicely explained by the BBC, into a space where you can have a meeting or go to a party, attend the ConsciousCafe. It will become so sophisticated by 2023 that what we call the metaverse now will have its own name. Okay, not so long-winded perhaps. And the spaces will look different. They'll be more naturalistic. And the version of yourself that you choose will also be a bit less robotic, okay, than this. So what's being touted at the moment is the first venture. It's really going to take the ingress of Jupiter into Aries in May 2022 for it to really start climbing in potential. And by the time Jupiter and Chiron are both firmly in Aries by the beginning of 2023, Chiron being a symbol of what you can get away with, you may have a wardrobe of virtual clothing to choose from. You may have virtual wigs that you can pop onto your head. So you don't end up looking a bit like Andrew Bosworth on the left here. Whatever you want, it will be in your virtual wardrobe. But that's not all there is to this cycle. The other thing about Aries is that it's very much about your identity, okay, and your face, literally your face. Aries has always ruled the face and the head. One of the previous cycles that we had through Aries saw huge importance being placed on ID tags or dog tags. It was a period during the war when everything depended upon your little metal necklace, because of course, if you were shot, injured in battle, that was your ID tag. So the word identity and the notion of online identity and owning your face is really where Jupiter in Aries is at. And you'll remember that he's a problem solver. One of the problems for Jupiter to solve as he goes into Aries from May next year is the issues about privacy that have arisen, the issues of the ownership of your identity online, and of course, something that astrology predicted a long time ago before the virus, the introduction of a different sort of passport. So there are lots of questions here about facial recognition identity, about a vaccination passport in your country, about your name, your face, your likeness, and who owns that. All intensely personal to you, and that's something that's going to be solved in the second half of 2022, the first half of 2023. So if we go back to the screen so I can see everybody's faces, I can ask people to indicate with a show of hands if they do have anything in Aries in their natal chart, or any Aries here, and certainly does. Oh my God, she's got 5, that's a stellium. Basically, if you're an Aries type, or you are an Aries, or an Aries, you're going to see this natural conclusion, really, to a very long cycle of rebranding and rethinking who you are. Believe it or not, there was a time when we were not plastered all over the internet. I think it was Andy Warhol who said in the future everybody will be famous for 15 minutes. Well, as soon as Uranus went into Aries many, many years ago, the revolution started. And today we are so used to seeing representations of ourselves online. We are so used to the idea of our faces being public property. And that has come with all sorts of problems as well, with more to come to solve. People who are mostly Aries influenced, or who are Aries, will be front and center and at the front line of all those debates. So watch out for that, because they are here to change the way that we think about who owns our face on a camera, on a CCTV camera, in a passport. Who owns our identity? Are we across that or not? That's what will come up in 2022. Gina, do you want to give me some questions that have come up?
Yes, I'd love to. So we've got a few country ones. Do you want me to give you advance notice of that? I mean, somebody's asked about what do you see happening for Afghanistan? I'll just pick that out as a country. I don't know whether we've got any Afghanis with us.
I don't have my Book of World Horoscopes here, but I will answer you online.
Okay. Cryptocurrency uses massive electricity. What is the answer?
That's a good example of the shock. just when everybody thought that they were able to ignore the reality of astrology, astrology comes and kind of bites you in the bottom. So we're going to see a huge crisis because of that, is the short answer. The eventual digital currency that we end up with, the local currency that we saw earlier, is not the stuff of the top 1%. All right, it's not about the top 1%, because the top 1% is disappearing in 2023. The power is going. Pluto is out of Capricorn. By 2024, it's ancient history. So all the power then goes to the people. We live in a far more egalitarian global society once Pluto goes into Aquarius, which is the sign of brotherhood and sisterhood. And from that point forward, it becomes clear that the real money is not in that kind of Wall Street game playing or in the overconsumption of electricity. The real money is in a way to make money work for the local community. And that's going to lead to all sorts of, interestingly enough, throwbacks to the 1350s, when it was all about the market. It was all about the local marketplace. Very simple, doesn't have to be complicated. And you'll set your own value. In this, you can duck and dive and find your way to making it work for you. But the trick is to be light on your feet and agile. So even now, you know, people talking about Bitcoin, it's the stuff of Pluto in Capricorn and its rivals. They are the stuff of the top 1%. Yet again, it's the same old game. But according to all the laws of astrology, that game stops in 2023. We don't know why. In many countries of the world, it's about elections. So we're heading for a US election, which is like none other that we've seen. Okay. It's the rise of people power. It's the rise of diversity, community, and equality in a way that's not been possible for a very long time. But there's something else about 2023, 2024, and we just don't know. It may be a share market crash. It may be the mass arrest of people who've been money laundering. But it certainly removes the people from the top of the mountain, because Capricorn is the mountain goat who climbs to the top. That's a very long answer.
I've got a question here about how do you see the end of globalization affecting the Chinese dominance of the world economy? Is that something you can address, or is that a country question that you want to reflect on?
No, I remember enough about this prediction. I remember doing this prediction in 2019 about China, actually about New Zealand as well, because I noticed something in the world horoscopes. Incidentally, all this data comes from Nicholas Campion's Book of World Horoscopes, which is the Bible for those of you who are interested in astrological charts for countries. It looked to me as if everything was going to turn upside down. And I think we did in our session last year, Gina and Judy, predicting 2021. I had a map of New Zealand that showed it at the top of the world. The world was going to turn upside down. The world order was going to transform. That's still the case with China. And this does tie into the question about supply shortages and rationing that's going to become a reality over the next 2 years. Chinese manufacturing is over. And this is another old prediction. Made in China becomes ancient history. We just won't have the same globalized economy anymore, in the same way that they didn't have the same slave economy after 1781. It is always the most traditional, conservative people who are the most shocked when it happens, okay? But it is coming. And I think we're going to see more than one share market crash between here and 2026, sometimes a sequence of them in the space of a year. The value of things, what things are worth, is the big change area with Uranus and Taurus. And we saw that in 1939, which was the last big Uranus in Taurus, a node cycle in Taurus and Scorpio, wheelbarrows full of money, people going to the bank and taking notes away in wheelbarrows. The price of something basic like food in Germany would fluctuate within a month or two. We are getting towards that weird territory now where people have to figure out, what is this worth in my hand? Because it's not what it used to be worth, and it could change at a moment's notice. So you're going to have to be pretty agile with all of this. But if you think that it's business as usual, and that we're going to go back to China's old place in the world economy, You couldn't be further from the truth. I know lots of people are switched on and already ahead of that.
Great. I'm going to pick out Stephen's question about mention of it, batteries. Electric car batteries strip the earth of minerals and use slave African labor, and disposing of them pollutes the earth. Is electric really viable long term?
I don't know the source for that information. It's quite interesting. Maybe you could put it in the chat box.
Yeah, Stephen Taylor sent it to me. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's I don't know if I can verify that or not. I do know that Uranus in Gemini translates as electricity through cars, quite literally, and electricity through bikes. The last time that we saw the Uranus in Gemini cycle was during the war and post-war, and two objects came out of that which are really interesting: the Land Rover and the Lambretta, the scooter. The Jeep was demanded by American GIs so that they could bomb around Italy quickly from one camp to another. Today, the four-wheel drive is descended from the Jeep, and that was the Uranus Gemini invention. And the Lambretta and the Vespa were also invented on the same cycle. So today's motorbikes are once again that's the ancestor of it. So I have to say, the truth is, astrology is saying it will be electric. However, whatever way that works, it's going to be plug-in, and it will be as new and radical and weird to us, but it's also as exciting as the Jeep was in the 1940s, the Lambretta and the Vespa scooter.
Right. Information about the large trends for baby boomers who are still hanging around.
Large trends for what, sorry?
For baby boomers who are still here.
Okay, so baby boomers, you were born during the 1940s. Okay, so you were about the right age for Uranus and Gemini. So one of the things that was true for your generation, which will be true again, is that language is going to alter. And this will be because of the internet and because of telephone technology, but language is going to open up. Your generation learned languages. You had to learn languages because you were living in a new world after the war. So the idea of translation software is still pretty clunky, but it's going to become extremely sophisticated in stages. And from 2026, we should have reached a stage where you can send your avatar into a virtual space to talk with people from all over the world in real time with real language translation. So that's one of the things that your generation is going to see again, but advanced, because the rule with these cycles with Uranus is that every time you come around to them, the outer planets, you always go a step up and a step further. So that's coming for your generation. And the other thing that's really going to make a difference to you is understanding that the internet is for everybody and not just for coders. Okay, your generation is the Bletchley Park. You're the Bletchley Park babies. Okay, you grew up with code and you grew up with the Enigma machine very much behind everything that happened during the war. This idea of code and coding is very Gemini. And as we go through this rolling Gemini weather up until 2026, what used to be a hands-off part of normal life, the mysterious world of geek coding on the internet, is going to just open up to everybody. So that's a good thing. Jupiter goes into Gemini before Uranus does. That's a good thing. That's where we're heading.
A question about the future of Brexit.
Oh, that's a good one. Shall I get the tarot for that one? With the tarot, for those of you who are new to it, you shuffle, okay? Focus on the question, but you need a time zone. You need a time, because otherwise the cards will tell you until the rest of eternity. So I think we should probably give ourselves a good couple of years. Yeah, that's the nodal cycle. And then you have to identify with the tarot on whose behalf are you asking. You see, that's a very interesting question. In general, for the people who are here and the people who are going to be watching this into the future.
Brexit is an English term. It's a UK term, isn't it? It's really our relationship with Europe rather than Europe, I would imagine. Yeah. It's Vivian who asked that question.
Okay, let's see. Let's see what the cards are saying. I could have predicted that. You don't even need to be a tarot professional to understand what that is. This is the European Union fighting amongst itself. Okay. It's also the United Kingdom fighting within itself, because you can see England, Scotland, Ireland, Northern Ireland, and Wales. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so you've got the European nations. There's usually a bit of a code in Pamela's cards, so some of you who are psychic will be picking it up. Sometimes you can do that with them and you can see a letter spelled out, or you can turn them upside down and see little signs and symbols. Anyway,
like an N and an A, isn't it, or an X?
There is no unity within 2 years. And yet the irony is that it could structurally be a huge success. This is rather like the Amish raising a barn. You can make a huge success of it if everybody would only just get on with it. So here we have Europe disagreeing amongst itself, and we have the 5 nations who can't agree either. As with all the tarot, there is the potential for this to change, but it's going to take an enormous amount of effort. And you can see how easy it would be for one nation to leave. I am reminded of Scotland with this card because, of course, this is caber tossing, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Isn't this the national sport for Scotland? Anyway, that's the short answer. What's another question?
Okay. If you're not in the community you love, is it time to find one that you do love? Because you're talking about the emphasis and the importance of community. And another related question, where's the best, is it a good time to move and relocate if you're not in the right town?
Yes, don't do it on Mercury retrograde though. Mercury retrograde is upon us until February 24. Life will be in flux. People will change their minds. Things will get stuck. The weather will be extreme. COVID will make life abnormal as usual on Mercury retrograde. So choose your moments, okay? But in general, yes. And look at your horoscope, because if you have anything in Cancer, which is a sign of home, property, houses and flats and gardens, then that is going to be nicely massaged by Jupiter in Pisces, Neptune in Pisces, and all the nodes in Taurus and Scorpio. So you are in a good position, but for your personal choices, you need to time it for your chart. If you don't want to do that, or you can't do that, just use the tarot. It's a very good shortcut, and it's free on my website.
I'm going to ask a question about where's the best place for community in the United States during this new cycle. I've got a question about Russia. Again, you may wish to reflect on those countries. And there's a number of people who've asked specific to themselves. They're more personal questions, which I'm not going to read out. I don't know if there's a space for that. But if you want to put your question in here, it saves me trolling back through 100 questions. If you want me to ask you a question, please put that up. So America, the best place for community in the US. Are you able to answer that one?
Gee, no, not really. Not in general, because it's about you. Whoever asked the question, it's about what you want, okay, and where you're going. What I will say is that the trend to local is the new world, will dominate America the way it's going to dominate everywhere else. So we're going to see, I've said this before and I'll say it again, a splitting up of your country into territories which are very marked and very different with their own rules. You're going to see this in the United Kingdom, you're going to see it in the United States, and in Australia it's already starting to happen as individual states are deciding their own rules and regulations about border control and COVID. COVID is the driver, okay? Of course it's the driver, but beyond that, it will be about like-minded people finding each other. I think I made a prediction maybe 2 years ago looking at the chart for the United States that Hawaii would separate, and I still think that's going to happen. You're going to find over time the relationship between New Zealand and Hawaii strengthens. And I've always said New Zealand repeatedly, because the chart's extraordinary. In fact, I went to New Zealand to give a talk on it because I couldn't quite believe what I was seeing, and that was 2016. This country is not like any other country on the planet at the moment. And the model that the Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, is pursuing is going to work. And when it works, and every other attempt at a model doesn't work, it will be to New Zealand that people turn for the template. And that sounds idealistic, but it's chart showing, and places that are closest to New Zealand or have the closest trade relationship with New Zealand are in a position to strike a new deal, and Hawaii is geographically very close. So I'd have a look at Hawaii if I was you.
Okay. Now I'm interested in this question that who's asking the question, Caroline. Smart home technology, will smart home technology increase in demand and become the norm in a property? And then from my feng shui side, you know, it's like, whoa, all those electromagnetic fields in the home are private sanctuary. So can you speak to that about this smart home technology and the effect it might have on us, as well as the benefits?
Yes, I should add, for those of you who don't know, Gina is a feng shui expert and a well-known author in the field. Yeah, I don't see it because we're not in that kind of cycle. If we were going through something like Pluto in Cancer, you know, I'd go absolutely, completely, or Uranus in Cancer, Cancer being the sign that rules the home, but it's just not there. In fact, we're not seeing any major cycles in a zodiac sign that rules property or the home for a very long time to come. The closest that you're going to get to that idea of smart technology, talking fridges and all that kind of stuff, is the idea of a local scene where you could probably have, say, your local greengrocer in a smart connection with the local chemist, in an instant connection with the local new internet. It's on that level. If you go back to the idea of the village market, but you upgrade the technology, that's kind of where it's going.
There's been a few questions about living in places. Again, we're coming down to countries, which we might have to tackle separately. But this idea of, you know, having a second home in France, you know, having a holiday home that you go to extensively in Italy, living in two countries, where are we with that? Oh,
that's over.
That is over.
That's over. Sorry, folks. You can't go through a mutable sign cycle like this one, which we've had for every plague in history, and continue the old pattern of traveling to and fro. It just doesn't work. The last time that we had this cycle was AIDS, HIV in the 80s. The truth and the reality about the virus is it travels. That's what it does. If it doesn't travel, it doesn't survive. And you're going to see a pushback from local against foreign, because of course it is the local people who suffer when a foreign virus variant comes in. And the first patient zero of the Omicron variant was a man from Hong Kong who'd flown to South Africa, who brought it back to Hong Kong. So his local area in Hong Kong is the pushback against the South African trip. There's a tremendous amount of evidence going back to not just the Spanish flu and AIDS, HIV, but also the Great Plague in 1665, right back to the Black Death again in the 1350s. And every single time we see the same thing happen. We see generations born with Sagittarius outer planets, which is the sign of foreign travel and international citizenship. And they are always caught up in a perfect storm between the mutable signs of Virgo, Pisces, and Gemini. And so they are always forced to reroute their entire lives, actually, which is what's happened historically. In fact, they were more advanced with quarantine in the 1600s. They used to, the term quarantine, I'm sure you know, comes from 40 days. You were meant to take 40 days out on your ship. That's how they stopped the plague coming in from France. That's a mutable sign cycle that they had then, and they figured it out way back in 1600. For some bizarre reason, it seems to have escaped British Airways and Qantas inversion, but that's the long and the short of it. It's not what you wanted to hear, but it's where it's going.
So we've got 2 or 3 questions which are interesting. One is about how will the masculine and feminine rebalance? There's a question about the concern about 5G. That's a specific one. There's a question about a general question about education and board exams as we know it. And there's a question about African nations, the potential they might have to leapfrog human and economic development. So I don't know whether you'd consider that one a general one you can answer, or that's a country specific. And I'm going to do a check-in because we're at 12:30. Do you want to answer those? And then is there a space you're going to offer people to continue with questions in case people want to leave now?
So Thank you for printing out the questions, Gina. If you send me all the questions on email, I'll answer them in the feature next week. Lots of you have the same questions, so that's easier to do. I'll look at the Africa chart then. I looked at the Africa chart in the 2021 prediction that we did, which is still on YouTube, and was talking a lot then about Africa, HIV and AIDS, and how that cycle was coming back. And of course, this Omicron variant has come from Africa. So I did look at the chart then, and I think that the future then, the answer then was the same that you're going to see in the United States. It's about the splitting up of Africa into local areas that control their own lives locally. Okay, that's coming. The male and female question is interesting, but I would probably need to look at that with a few more charts. So that would be one from my website.
Which one was that? What question was that?
The balance between male and female. It's a really important question for those of you who have Pluto or Uranus in Libra. You're the generation most affected by that.
Okay, so you're going to tackle that one later. Should we just do one last answer before we move towards closing? And do you want to take the idea of education? Because if there are any parents or grandparents here with children going through the education system, or anybody who's involved in that in terms of board exams, what do you think about that?
Yeah, that's a good question, because it's going to explode, partly because of telepresence, okay, but also because of sheer demand and supply. There are enough people now in the world who've got the skills to be able to pass on what they know to others in a completely different environment. And of course, you can overcome language barriers from 2026 because Uranus will be in Gemini. And with the Aries weather that we're going to see next year, it will be the relaunch of yourself in a virtual space as anybody that you want to be. So any normal barriers that you might have had about educating people go, because you can be whoever you want to be. Education is ruled by Gemini. Gemini is the sign to associate with schools and colleges. Universities and academia ruled by Sagittarius. Gemini is very much about quick information delivered in short bursts. And again, it's the local scene. So something that's going to happen, which will become much more acceptable, is that you'll be able to learn in your local area in a space that's social with other people from all backgrounds, ages, genders, walks of life. This is the Aquarius weather that's coming from 2023, and you'll probably have a computer propped up or some sort of new technology propped up in the space, so that you're learning with people in another country, but you're all learning locally. You're together, but you're apart. So it's exciting, really. If you are in the education game, you want to retrain, you want to study, or you want to teach, absolutely start in 2022. Two reasons for that. Ceres in Gemini comes in earlier in the year, and that's quite powerful. And then later on in 2022, Mars is retrograde in Gemini. So there is a huge push in education and the school system then. It will go back and forth, but by 2023, it's looking like it's part of life. And from 2024, you'll be so glad that you got involved. Yeah.
Fantastic. I mean, I'm actually studying a food as medicine course, based out of New York. I've got a little pod of group with somebody in South Africa. It's wonderful. It's how it affects me and my family, but I'm relating to people all over the planet in different hemispheres. It's fantastic. So it's great to hear about that. Now, when you talked about these three cycles, the Taurus cycle, about the new world economy, you've talked a lot about that. You talked about the Aries cycle, specifically the new you, your online presence. And then in the Pisces cycle, I don't know whether you want to add anything, because that's where, and I have the notes here, you're talking about the spirituality and psychology boom. I'm not sure whether you stress that, whether you would just want to spend a few minutes on, because I underlined here your notes, a different value system, the new inner economy. I don't know whether you want to finally stress that for people who are still here. And folks, you can add your questions to the chat. We're going to collate them all. So the inner economy and the psychology boom in Pisces, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, the inner economy is a perfect term for the Pisces-Taurus cycle. So this is huge, really. In the Middle Ages, the sign of Pisces in the 12th house was associated with solitude within a monastery or a convent or a nunnery. In the Middle Ages, it was associated with God. It was very much about religion in a conventional way. Later on in the 20th century, some astrologers began associating it with mental hospitals. They began associating it with jail. All of that is completely off the mark, because all you need to know about the 12th house is it is about your inner life and inner self. So given that we have Jupiter and Neptune going through it, yes, you will be by yourself, but it's a good thing. You are by yourself already if you're living in the world in the last couple of years. You are spending more time by yourself for all sorts of reasons. I had friends who had their Christmas dinner by themselves because they had to self-isolate at Christmas. But for whatever reason, we are indoors more, and what we need to develop on the inside will be there. A lot of the things that people used to spend money on to make themselves happy didn't make them happy at all. What they're going to discover on this cycle through the 12th is that it is the inner riches that really do pay off. And it's very much about the modality that you choose. Some of you are going to be interpreting your dreams because dreams are ruled by Pisces. Some of you will be delving into the work of Carl Jung or Sigmund Freud because the unconscious mind is ruled by Pisces. Others of you will be going back to the church. You may be born again Christians, or you may be exploring Hindu religion. Okay, it depends entirely on where you come from. There's also a big slant with the 12th house towards hypnosis. Every single time that we've seen this transit of Jupiter and Neptune, we get a boom in what they used to call mesmerism. So this exploration of the unconscious mind and your relationship with sleep is going to be terribly important. And in fact, it's already started. So Jupiter's in Pisces right now alongside Neptune. Those of you who have anything at 0 degrees in your horoscope, you have Jupiter at 0 degrees Pisces right now for the first time in a very long time, and it will be aspecting that in your chart. So it's going off, being triggered. What we're going to see with the new inner economy is people realizing that they don't actually have to spend any money to find more contentment or more happiness. And people, teenagers roll their eyes when you say that because it sounds so boring. They've heard it all before, but it's completely true. The only thing to add really is that Jupiter always takes you to the next level. So if you are a meditator, circumstances change, you go to the next level, you go up a grade. If you are already interpreting your dreams, circumstances change, you go up a grade, and so on.
I know we've run over slightly, but in the era of COVID, I do want to ask this question about the freedom that you're talking about. There's a question here. Are we going to be free or ruled by a big brother attitude of everything being known about us, vaccine passports, etc.? And what about those of us not choosing to have the vaccine? So is there anything you can speak to that? Because that's very present at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah, very much so. Yes, you'll see the pushback against that. As soon as Jupiter goes into Aries in May next year, Mars goes in pretty soon after that. So it goes off with a bang. It's very quick. And being Aries, it's going to be people being front and center and really pushing quite aggressively for changes that they see they want. I looked at the NHS chart for the United Kingdom early this year, and it's really clear that it's going to be replaced. Okay, it's going to be replaced in the first quarter of next year. And part of that is identification, data bank and data kept on you. There's really no way around that except for the carving out of individual rights and responsibilities within that. But the NHS as an institution, we have a horoscope for it, and it's basically going. It's going already, isn't it? But it's going to be replaced quite sort of strongly. The idea about vaccination and individual rights comes back to the question of local again. So speaking from my own experience here in Tasmania, we are the smallest island at the bottom of Australia. We couldn't get a vaccine. We didn't have a vaccine for a very long time. There was no injection on the island where I live. We have 500,000 people on our island, and we had 0 cases. We kept 0 cases for over a year. There was no case in the community because we controlled travel. So there were army officers outside the hotels. You were lucky if you could get into a hotel in the first place. You were required to be in there for 2 weeks at least. And then, and only then, were you allowed to have your holiday in Tasmania. So that's just one example. There are quite a few around the world of places where there was never any vaccine, but there were 0 cases. So the astrologer in me always goes back to that mutable sign weather that we've seen in every plague. The answer is travel. The problem is travel. The answer is travel. If you control travel, you can actually live a life without vaccination. we are the living proof of it here. It's been repeated all over the world in places which never had a vaccine. So where you choose to live in the future will be a faithful reflection of that. And you will be able to choose very local communities or places, counties or towns or cities or villages, which have strong structures in place where you could call it dodgy, sneaky, legally, they can ensure that they get what they want, that they don't have to go along with the system that's coming from another part of the country. That's going to be a rising thing next year. Mars in Gemini is very much about translated. It means local activism and also local anger. Okay, so what you're going to see next year, the second half of 2022, is people really getting quite active and quite angry about their place, their town, their city, and vaccination will come into that.
So that's, you're talking about this pushback in May where people pushing for change, that's potentially pushing against the pressure potentially of vaccines. On the point of the NHS and it's changing, I mean, there's two ways it could go. More and more Americanized and you pay for it, and pharma have even more control than they have, and they have virtually total control now. Or we have more of a natural health service ascending. Is that the possibility where we've got the focus on actually keeping our immune systems well and having that as a conversation and natural ways, because that's not included now? How do you see this National Health Service moving up, down, sideways, two ways?
It feels as if anybody with Virgo factors in their horoscope, and that's all of you who are born in the 60s, have Uranus and Pluto there. But even those of you who are in your 20s, if you have anything in Virgo, you are in a spectacular position to get what you want. And Virgo rules the body. It rules the mind, body, and spirit. You are about to enter a cycle where the sign of Virgo is being basically massaged left, right, and center. All the transits support your Virgo factors, your Virgo side. So if that's the way that you want your healthcare system to proceed, with space for alternative therapies and modalities, then if you collectively push for it, the odds are on your side. It's really unusual to see Uranus in Taurus trine Virgo in the chart, to see the lunar nodes in Taurus and Scorpio trine and sextile the Virgo in your chart. And it's really about ongoing long-term trends. Even Pluto in Capricorn will trine the Virgo in some people's charts. So what a trine means, or a sextile, is flow. So you get this flow. It's really like surfing. You've got to pick it up and surf with it. So when they're ready to replace it, and it's been in the planning stages now since 2019, according to the chart, you need to be able to pick up your surfboard and surf collectively to get what you want, because it's very, very difficult to stop an entire generation of people born with Uranus and Pluto in Virgo.
Wow. Let's have a look at everybody. I'm going to change my screen to the group view. As usual, we've run over, but what you've said is you're going to take the questions that we've got here on the chat and collate them and put them on your website next week. We'll be sending that out. Of course, we've been recording, we're still recording now, and that recording won't go out in the next 24 hours. We're in holiday week, but we'll get it out as soon as we can for everybody who's on this call and we're registered for it. And well done. We've had 99% of people here to the end. And Jessica, thank you so much. Your fluency across such a wide range of subjects and times gives me goosebumps. It's amazing. I'm sure we can all do this and say thank you